40 years ago, Chernobyl was sealed off as a radioactive death zone. Every scientific forecast at the time confirmed one thing: life would completely disappear here for thousands of years. But when sensor cameras were placed inside the core zone, the footage they captured completely overturned biological knowledge. Among the ruined buildings, a brutal counterattack by nature is taking place. Large predators that had disappeared for a century have now suddenly returned. Especially the grey wolf packs, they move freely through areas of extremely high radioactive contamination places, with enough energy to break DNA, a structure in only a few hours. Even more remarkably, pressure from ionizing radiation is forcing their genomes to restructure themselves to resist cancer. Why is the worst nuclear disaster in history becoming a research environment for the special adaptive evolution of wildlife? What truth is hidden there? Every mystery began when humans suddenly disappeared in 1986. Within 36 hours, 116,000 people were urgently evacuated from Pripyat, leaving behind a gigantic ecological vacuum. Humans had completely stepped aside before an invisible agent, radioactive particles, floating in the air. Immediately, a special biological mechanism was activated to fill that empty space. In the first stage, the ecosystem seemed to collapse completely. The red forest suffered biological depletion, turned burnt orange, and became a gigantic radioactive contamination zone. No birdsong, no footsteps, only silence covering everything. Every theory at that time believed this land had ended. However, the permanent relocation of hundreds of thousands of residents immediately after the disaster instantly established a gigantic regional ecological vacuum. The complete end of human presence unintentionally removed a survival pressure, even harsher, more continuous, and more widely destructive than nuclear radiation itself, industrial exploitation, and large-scale daily activity from civilization. Before the disaster, the biological network here was continuously suppressed by many factors. Habitat fragmentation caused by transportation infrastructure, changes in the physical and chemical structure of soil caused by agriculture, and interference with the hydrological system. Sources of noise pollution, light pollution, and hunting pressure had completely isolated wildlife species into limited areas. When the 2,600 square kilometer exclusion zone was established, all mechanical, agricultural, and forestry activities were absolutely suspended. The environment at Chernobyl entered an ecological paradox. This area carried extremely high cellular toxicity, but was completely protected from the negative impacts of human society. International conservation experts confirm one important reality. For wildlife populations, the risk of cellular structure damage or genetic change from radiation is still much lower than the risk of extinction caused by habitat loss from human territorial expansion. Ionizing radiation mainly affects the individual level, while human activities lead to population decline and species extinction. The absence of humans serves as the core catalyst, releasing suppressive pressures and creating the space and time needed for nature to restart the entire energy transformation cycle across the landscape surface. Data from a network of 42 motion sensor and infrared camera stations deployed deep inside the core zone has proven the powerful re-establishment of the primitive trophic pyramid. This process did not happen randomly, but strictly followed the mechanism of source and sink dynamics. Through abandoned concrete structures and asphalt roads, now being broken apart by tree roots, central grazing ungulate populations such as red deer, moose, European roe deer, and wild boar migrated from safer border regions deep into the radioactive zone. The abundance of recovering vegetation in a human-free space has turned Chernobyl into a gigantic biomass supply center. In particular, in 1998, Scientists introduced 30 Przolski's wild horses, an extremely endangered species, into this area with the purpose of controlling the excessive growth of radioactive weeds. Contrary to every prediction of decline caused by radiation, this horse population has reproduced strongly and has now risen to establish large herds with more than 200 individuals, freely moving through the ruins of Pripyat town. The biomass explosion at the lower and middle levels of this trophic pyramid immediately created a physical pull of energy, bringing the reappearance of higher-level consumer species. The monitoring system has continuously recorded clear images of grey wolf packs establishing macro territories and organizing hunts across radioactive areas. The Eurasian lynx, a large cat specialized in solitary hunting, has also re-established its position. Most notable is the return of the brown bear, a large mammal with enormous survival space requirements, which had been absent from this area for more than a century because of habitat loss and overhunting. Independent and quantitative analysis reports from the British Ecological Society and many international organizations have confirmed wildlife density in the Chernobyl core zone is now completely comparable, and in some species such as grey wolves, even 7 times higher than in non-radiation exposed nature reserves in Eastern Europe. This powerful revival has established an evidence-based ecological law. Wildlife networks have the capacity to absorb and endure risks from high-level background radiation exposure, as long as they are provided with a habitat environment that is not physically fragmented and an abundant food supply chain without competition. The strong numerical growth of animal populations is not simply the process of filling physical space. Scientists around the world were truly astonished when they dissected the molecular, physiological, and genetic mechanisms of the organisms here. Instead of collapsing under the constant DNA breaking effects of ionizing radiation, animal populations at Chernobyl are undergoing a process of directional selection and adaptation at maximum accelerated speed. A breakthrough and widely discussed study from evolutionary biologists specializing in ecotoxicology at Princeton University focused on directly analyzing blood and tissue samples from grey wolf populations living in high radiation zones. These wolves, because of their habit of moving across territories, covering tens of square kilometers each day, and consuming meat from radioactive herbivores, have been absorbing an enormous accumulated radiation dose. Measuring devices attached to their collars recorded exposure levels of up to 11.28 millirem per day, a number more than 6 times higher than the legal safety limit allowed for human workers in nuclear environments. However, biomedical data shows that the genomes of these wolves have not degraded. Instead, they have undergone clear structural changes to respond to the harsh environment. Their immune systems continuously activate specific biochemical responses, changing the distribution of cellular immunity. They increase the production and alter the function of T white blood cells, the core force responsible for identifying and destroying pathogens and cancer cells. Even more notably, their genomes have produced tissue repair mechanisms and tumor formation resistance similar to the responses of an organism undergoing medical radiation therapy. This is a leap forward in ecological genetics. Pressure from the radioactive environment has acted as an extremely harsh survival sorting membrane. It immediately removes individuals carrying weak radiation resistance genes through illness and reduced lifespan, while retaining, strengthening, and replicating the gene segments with the strongest cellular recovery capacity. The animal generations now born in Chernobyl carry within them an upgraded and specifically designed immune system, allowing them to maintain reproduction, anti-inflammatory capacity, and hunting ability right in the center of radioactive hotspots without being collapsed by cellular decline or necrotic cancer. Despite the rise and explosion of the ecological network, the chemical structure of this land still maintains an absolute and constantly changing level of risk. Radioactive isotopes do not simply evaporate away. They have been integrated deep into the very core of the biogeochemical cycle of the entire territorial system through an extremely dangerous mechanism in nature called chemical mimicry. Radioactive isotopes such as strontium-90 carry chemical properties and electron shell structures similar to the essential element calcium, while cesium-137 carries properties similar to the element potassium. Because of this physical similarity, plant roots, and especially underground mycorrhizal fungal networks, have continuously made mistakes during the nutrient absorption process. They absorb these radioactive isotopes from the soil instead of normal minerals, then transport and transform them into the entire surface structure, from stems and roots to fruit and seeds. The new vegetation and fungi growing here are acting like gigantic biomass reservoirs, carrying this radiation directly into the food chain. Herbivores such as deer and moose consume radioactive vegetation, and their bodies identify strontium-90 as calcium, immediately accumulating this element directly into their bone and antler structures, causing exposure from inside the blood-forming center. Meanwhile, wild boars, with their habit of digging deep into the soil to search for truffles, carrying highly accumulated cesium-137, have become the animals with the highest localized radiation levels in the area, a phenomenon scientists call the radioactive wild boar paradox. When predators such as wolves or lynx eat these animals, cesium-137 continues to enter and accumulate in their soft muscle tissues. Semi-aquatic animals such as otters and mink consume fish from radioactive rivers, then bring these minerals back onto land through excretion and their own death. This phenomenon of bioaccumulation and biomagnification means ionizing radiation no longer lies quietly in the soil background, but becomes a continuously circulating component, moving powerfully through the blood and flesh of the wild world. The existence of the long-term half-lives of heavy isotopes itself determines the geographic fate and future of Chernobyl. While lighter and more active elements, such as iodine-131, decayed completely only a few days after the explosion, cesium-137 and strontium-90 need about 30 years for their radiation intensity to decrease by half. Even more frightening, through the process of natural decay, the isotope plutonium-241 is gradually decaying into americium-241. This transformation means that in certain specific areas, alpha radiation levels are actually increasing strongly over time, not decreasing. The presence of the isotope plutonium-239, with a half-life of up to 24,000 years, has established an uncrossable limit for human physiology, creating a permanent physical barrier against civilian or economic restoration projects. This enormous geological timespan guarantees one thing with certainty: human agriculture, mining, or urban planning will not be able to re-invade and destroy this territory for hundreds of generations to come. Through the harshest paradox in environmental science, the most serious nuclear accident in human history directly established a vast and inviolable involuntary reserve. Ionizing radiation, the most brutal cell-destroying weapon, acts as a perfect ecological defense force, permanently rejecting the expansion of humanity and guaranteeing absolute evolutionary freedom for the wild animal and plant network. The file on the Chernobyl exclusion zone is the strongest and most convincing evidence of the limitless self-regulating power of Earth's biosphere. The nuclear leak event of 1986 was a strict warning about the limits of controlling physical energy, a total failure of industry. But from a macro-ecological perspective, the powerful revival of the exclusion zone has changed the arrogant belief that nature always needs artificial conservation programs and civilizational maintenance intervention in order to exist. Biological reality has proven with undeniable data that the web of life always possesses the ability to re-establish a state of dynamic balance, fill ecological gaps, and even force genomes to change in order to overcome the most extreme limits of environmental toxicity. Without any artificial support, planning, or reintroduction, Nature has turned the dangerous leaked radiation itself into a ruthless survival filter. It rebuilt the entire trophic pyramid from zero and turned a reinforced concrete ruin of humanity into one of the most complex centers of biological evolution, where life continuously defeats death at the cellular level. Press like and share this evidence-based scientific file right now to spread a new perspective on the evolutionary laws of nature. Do not forget to press the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to continue joining us as we analyze complex ecological phenomena, decode wild genetic adaptations, and directly face the harsh laws of survival in the next in-depth files. Civilization may collapse and leave permanent physical wounds on the landscape surface, but the ability of the living network to re-establish itself and evolve will always be an immortal constant.